Welcome everyone to our first summer broadcast of the MTA. I'm here with my partner, Max Page. Max, do you want to say hello?
Yes, indeed. Hi, Merrie. Hi, MTA members. Good to see you all.
Good to see you. I know people are feeling a sense of relief that summer is here, although I think a little bit of dread because of how much rain, and a real feeling that things are beginning to stabilize. There's a lot of good news, and there's a lot of work because while certain things are starting to stabilize, we have great destabilization ongoing in higher ed. Look, it goes without saying that we're living through a dual pandemic of racism and COVID-19. It was the intersection of Black Lives Matter movement and the pandemic that has just pulled back the curtain on many forms of structural racism in education, housing, employment, healthcare, and childcare, just to name a few. And as a result, the disparate impact on communities of color and those of low-income backgrounds were laid bare for the world to see. Well, the MTA has been on the front lines for a very long time, fighting for racial, social, economic, and gender justice. Before the pandemic, the Fund Our Future campaign was designed to expose the impact of structural racism in the forms of decades of disinvestment in the public education system, pre-K all the way through higher education. And it was the passage of the Student Opportunity Act, which was our state's legislators' commitment to begin to dismantle racism in pre-K-12, yet we've not made progress in funding public higher education or the Cherish Act. There's a history of public disinvestment that's resulted in under-resourced campuses, an exploited faculty and staff, a skyrocketing debt problem, and the costs of crucial support, the cuts to crucial support systems and services that really become the obstacle for our students, particularly our students of color with low-income backgrounds, to pursuing a degree in higher education successfully. It's become out of reach for too many students, and this crisis in public education around affordability, enrollment drops, and the treatment of adjunct faculty has been exacerbated by the pandemics. Now we have significant drops in college enrollment, particularly at community college, our public community college system of our Black and Latinx students during the pandemic to the point that it's deepening the already existing inequities. And it's projected to be more of the same come the fall. So tonight we invited U.S. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley to join three of our higher ed members who are educators in highlighting what the crisis looks like for real and talk about our plan to advocate for the funds for the American Rescue Act plan. And you all know our Vice President, Max Page, comes from higher ed. So he has a particular eye on the details and what's necessary. Max, tell us a little bit about what the MTA is calling for with the American Rescue Plan Act to support our community colleges and higher ed institutions.
Great. Thanks, Merrie. Yeah. So that, there's two central premises, and you've hit on that first one right away, which is, we just should say it straight out. We cannot achieve the goal of a racially and economically just Massachusetts without high quality, debt-free public higher education. You just mentioned the crisis of really just a collapse in new enrollment of students of color in our community colleges during the pandemic. And that is only the tip of the iceberg of a real problem of vast gulf between who is able to go to college and complete it and who is not. And it is working class students and students of color who have faced the biggest obstacles in the Commonwealth. So that's one. The good side, the number two, the second premise I just want to lay out there is, as you alluded to, we have an unprecedented opportunity with the American Rescue Plan Act. There is $5.3 billion with a B, billion dollars that is sitting with the state right now to be invested. And so in conversations with members and at our annual meeting, we came up with three areas that we think there should be major investment in from those ARPA monies. We're not inventing this. We're not sort of dreaming. We're talking about money that is there that can be spent on these crucial areas. And so number one is addressing this problem of high tuition and fees that are a huge obstacle to our working-class students and students of color. We proposed eliminating tuition and fees for the next 2 years for our neediest students. That is our Pell eligible students across the board in the state. This would bring people back. This would jumpstart a return to public higher education, especially among those who need the help the most. The student debt that students take on when they have high tuition, it burdens them not just for a few years, but often well into middle age, as many of you on this Facebook Live event know. So we have to take that away. It's not that long ago that a student could go to a college in Massachusetts, 2-year, 4-year, and work 10 hours a week, a minimum wage job, and graduate debt free. And that is long gone. That same student graduates with something like $32,000 of debt, and that stays with them well into their sometimes into their middle age. So that's one, is getting rid of that, getting rid of the tuition and fees for the next couple of years to really help our students return to college. But we also have to provide not just access, but help them succeed. That is, get through college. And there's investments that can be made in our faculty and staff and in programs to help students, guide them, provide support in the summers so that they don't just get to college, but they also get through. So that's number one, is really address the cost issue and the success issue. But related to that is justice. Number two is justice for adjunct faculty. We have exploited in this state our adjunct faculty. Low pay, no job security, no health care, no pensions. So we propose a fix to be able to provide health care, pensions, and pay parity to our adjunct faculty members who teach in some places, in some of our campuses, 70 or 80% of the courses. So then finally, the third area is building safe, green and healthy campus buildings. And that's good for the environment, for our students and our faculty and staff who work there. But when the state invests in campuses, it also can relieve some of the campus debt that is such a burden. When the state has taken underfunded public higher education, guess who starts paying the bills for the campus upkeep and the new campus buildings? Student fees, and the campuses take out bonds. So in fact, the huge campus debt turns into student debt. At Salem State University, over $3,000 a year in student tuition and fees is just to pay the interest on the bonds to build the buildings. These are state buildings. They used to be paid for by the state. They should be again. So if we invest in campus buildings, we also lessen the pressure on more student debt. So those are the three areas, Merrie, that we've all been talking about. And I just want to end with this note, which is investing in public higher education, making it accessible, investing in the faculty and staff, investing in the buildings is one of the very best investments we can make for the short and long term for our economy. And that's just not rhetoric. That's not just rhetoric. That's not just me saying that. I think they'll put in the chat a link to a report that proves this. That when the state wants to invest for the long term, for the economic prosperity of the Commonwealth, public higher education is one of the very best investments. And I'll just end with this, which is what I started with, because I just think it's so important in this moment to say it, that we cannot achieve our goals of a racially and economically just Commonwealth without providing high quality, debt-free public higher education. And at this moment, we actually have the money to do it. So let's go out and do it. And I'm really excited to hear from Congresswoman Pressley, who's been a great advocate at the federal level for erasing student debt, but also our own members who can talk about it on the ground, what's needed. So back to you, Merrie.
Thank you, Max. And the key really is where are the sources of funding? The federal government has made a commitment to 50 states, including Massachusetts. And then later we can talk about how to go on and win the Fair Share Amendment, which is designated for public education. But now, Max, I'm going to say goodbye to you and tell you all it's my pleasure to introduce a powerful woman who really needs no introduction. Congressman Pressley, I hope that you don't mind. I'm going to bypass your credentials and introduce you in a very personal way. Congresswoman Pressley has always been a fierce advocate for education justice because she knows that education justice is racial justice. And before she rose to the national leadership, she was Boston's very own city councilor and one of our strong partners, as well as influential voice in the No on 2 campaign in 2016, which was the campaign that wanted to lift the cap on Massachusetts charter schools. And we stood shoulder to shoulder to say no, because we knew that charter schools were publicly funded and privately operated. And it was a siphoning off from communities of color, from schools of color, of public money to go to privately operated charter schools. And now Congresswoman Pressley has taken her passion and her commitment to racial justice to Washington, where she continues to fight for public education. Throughout the pandemic, she has been outspoken about the need to trust and listen to educators and the Massachusetts Teachers Association when they speak about how to safely return to in-person learning. And most recently, she speaks on the subject and fights ferociously on how to solve the crisis of student debt. And then the last thing that I want to say is not only is Congresswoman Pressley a fierce advocate for justice, but she leads by example and with courage. When she tells her personal stories of struggle, she inspires us. She teaches us how to be brave and overcome the challenges and how to stand up for what we believe in. Congresswoman Pressley, it really is such a pleasure to have you back with us again this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you, Merrie. And thank you, Max. Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be with my siblings in the movement of education justice. It's good to join you virtually, but I look forward to when we can be together physically in community sometime soon. And of course, this is important to me because I've always maintained that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And so, I'm going to offer a couple of minutes of remarks, but I know that I am preaching to the choir and the converted because you are the closest to the pain. But by being in proximate to the pain, you're also the closest to the solutions and the innovation, which is why I wanted to be in community with you and listen to you and learn from you. But I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I do that on purpose because I need the choir to sing, to continue to sing about these injustices and continue to sing about what we know the solutions are if we are willing to make those policy choices and those budget investments. So thank you to the MTA. You have been an incredible resource and voice for educators throughout our Commonwealth. And again, it is just good to be with you. I do want to take a moment, since you were referencing, Merrie, many of the ways in which I've worked on education justice. I would say one of the chief issues that brought me into advocacy on behalf of learning communities is the issue of trauma. And in fact, that's one of the things I'm proudest of having done in my 8-year tenure on the council, which was squarely focused on how do we mitigate the impacts of trauma, how do we prevent it, and then in Congress convening the first ever congressional hearing on the issue of childhood trauma. So bearing that in mind, I do just want to hold space for the trauma that our educators, our learners, our community writ large have experienced throughout these unprecedented challenges. And you and your members have navigated these challenges with great resolve, compassion, and grace. And so I just want to hold space for that and acknowledge that. And thank you for what you've done on the front lines of this pandemic in a diversity of roles. But chiefly, you have been a lifeline for our students, for our families and our communities. And now as we do the deep work of ushering in an equitable and just recovery, it is so critical that your voices and your lived experiences are centered. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing directly from all of you. Just a couple of things that I do just want to underscore much of which were eloquently stated by Max. But you all know the transformative power of higher education, as well as the real gaps to access and opportunity. High quality education has the ability to break generational poverty and heal and revitalize communities. And because of that potential, families, communities, and educators like yourselves have made incredible sacrifices to support students in their pursuit of education. I know many of you have paid out of your own pockets for meals, for school supplies, for application fees. I know that so many of you, without a second thought, have taken on additional roles as mentors, as social workers, as FAFSA filers and college counselors, because you love and believe in your students. And you've played a critical role in supporting those pursuing higher ed, working to make retention and completion possible. Max was speaking so eloquently and stridently about that. Completion possible in the face of significant barriers. You know firsthand just how inaccessible and unaffordable a higher education has become, and the crushing level of student debt that many are forced to take on. And we have got to dispel the myth, such a harmful characterization and narrative out there, that this is only happening, this burden of student debt is only happening to students who choose to pursue higher education at expensive, private, quote, elite universities. This is the reality for our students at public institutions, at HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions, and those choosing what historically was intended to be the most affordable option, community college. Community colleges are able to meet the unique needs of students with lower incomes, working parents, and veterans looking for specific skills and training to support themselves and their families. However, relatively lower tuition does not mean the students can afford to pay thousands of dollars out of pocket for community college. Since 2016, we've seen the rising trend of student borrowing to attend community colleges. Prior to the pandemic, nearly 40% of students attending two-year institutions graduated with debt, and 27% of those students defaulted on their loans. And we know those students borrowing and defaulting are disproportionately Black and brown, so already marginalized communities. And that is why we must cancel student debt at the federal level. By canceling student debt by executive action, President Biden can provide sweeping relief both to educators and to learners, and to millions of families, help reduce the racial wealth gap and begin to build the groundwork for a truly equitable and just long-term recovery. Now, I've led a resolution in Congress calling on President Biden to take this executive action to cancel up to $50,000 in federal student loan debt, and I am not giving up on this fight. We cannot overstate how impactful bold student debt cancellation would be for millions of families and communities, including the nearly 70% of educators that are shouldering student loan debt. But solving the crisis of education affordability and access is going to require boldness. It's going to require intersectional, comprehensive policy solutions at every level of government. So we need state budgets that will finally bring an end to the era of disinvestment and include the robust supports necessary for our public schools and colleges. The federal government has got to step up and invest in financial aid, like the Pell Grants, so that students aren't forced to borrow in the first place. We have to invest in wraparound supports, childcare, mental health services, services for returning veterans, to ensure that students are able to get to the finish line and get that degree. And we must make community colleges and public universities tuition free, period. If education is a public good, and we know that it is, then we have to invest in it like it is. Now, these aren't radical proposals. They're bold, they're responsive, they're necessary, and they're long overdue. We know when we invest in higher education as a public good, everybody wins. Now, as we work to turn the page in this deadly pandemic and the economic hardship that it has wrought, the stakes couldn't be any higher. In the fall of 2020, enrollment for Black and Hispanic and Latinx students at Massachusetts community colleges fell by a third. And that is unfortunately not surprising. Like I said, I'm preaching to the choir. given that our Black and Brown communities were hardest hit through the pandemic and are recovering the slowest, while other communities are rounding the corner. With limited or no access to childcare, the pressure of mounting bills, and the need to work increased hours as essential workers, attending school was not even a viable option. And for the many high school students who had difficulty engaging while learning virtually, navigating the application process was an even greater challenge. We must reverse these trends. That is why I fought for the inclusion of nearly $2 billion in funds in the American Rescue Plan for Massachusetts schools. These funds will help provide more financial aid to cover tuition, books, and living expenses. They'll provide students with the help that they need to re-engage in the classroom as well. Now, these are steep challenges which lie ahead for our public education systems as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and rebuild our economy. In this moment, we have the critical opportunity and responsibility to pave the way towards a more just and equitable future, a future that realizes the promise of high quality education for all, a future that invests in higher education as the public good that it is, a future that invests in our educators as the essential workers that they have always been. So I'm proud to be your sister in solidarity and partnership for this fight. And just know that you've got me every step of the way until these strides that are so desperately needed become a reality.
And we are proud to have you in sisterhood and to sing this song with you in the chorus. I mean, you know, the converse, the risk that we're running now is if we don't make this investment and public higher education becomes unreachable, it stops becoming a public good. And our students, when they get to 12th grade, after having just one funding for pre-K-12, when they graduate, they come to a cliff. There's no bridge for them to cross over to get to higher education. And nobody knows that better than our three members that we are about to bring on. I'd like to welcome Isabel Dapina. She is both a UMass Boston student, the president of the UMass Boston chapter of the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, a student organizer, and a parent with children in college. Sasha Link is an adjunct professor at Bridgewater State University and Massasoit Community College. She is a political and union activist and member of the Massachusetts State College Association and the Massachusetts Community College Council. And finally, I'd like to welcome Janitza Medina, who is an academic counselor at Bunker Hill Community College and a member of the Massachusetts Community College Council. These are the people who are right on the front lines, and they are educating our students who are experiencing the pain of trying to achieve their goals and their dreams. So welcome. I'm going to ask Isabel, just talk to us both from the perspective of a student yourself and a parent. Tell us what's happening. What are some of the obstacles? What's it like?
Hi, my name is Isabel Dapina, and I am a student at UMass Boston. I am the president of Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, Phenom. I am a student organizer and a parent. Thank you, Congresswoman Pressley, for fighting for justice and building a better future with my organization, Phenom, and the MTA. I fight for social and racial justice, and we fight for change. I am a parent, I am a student, and both me and my son are in college. At this point, I have $66K in debt from getting a public education, and I want my children to be able to get a great public education without debt. I want my son to go to college without financial burdens, so he doesn't have the same debt I have. Higher education is a right, and he shouldn't suffer for his educational needs. My son has to leave school due to the pandemic because he needed to work. His daughter is a newborn, and I am concerned about their future and want him to be all he can be. But due to the crisis and financial costs in higher education, I have great fear that he can't make it. This is all because state legislature defunded public higher education, but they can't fix it. we can make public 2- and 4-year college free. There is a bill in Massachusetts State House that will do that, and it's called the Debt Free Future Act. Phenom is fighting to make this bill the law in Massachusetts. We need to pass the Debt Free Future Act so everyone in Massachusetts has a shot at education. Congresswoman, will you help us build support in your district for this campaign? Student debt is impacting families like mine more than others. We don't have wealth to transfer to the next generation, and this leads to loss of opportunities. I am working on canceling student loan and how it affects Black, Indigenous, people of color students that's a part of my master in conflict. No matter how hard I work on this, the cost of college has shifted from the state to citizen. We need to fund higher education as well, kids 1 to 12, and we need it now. Educational system has a racist ideology that creates inequality across race, class, and gender. If we are going to be actively anti-racist, we need to practice what we preach. We need to show action, and we need it now. The cost of college and higher education is due now. I call upon our public officials to support families like mine. The Debt Free Future Act will make all 29 campuses in Massachusetts tuition free. It will also give extra grant money to low-income students who need it the most. Massachusetts needs this bill, and we need it now. There's a lot going on in the federal level, but we also have the opportunity to make change here locally. We need to work together on all levels for change. My daughter starts high school in the fall, and I don't want her to have the same problems with debt from higher education that both my son and I have. I want a future where my daughter doesn't have debt and where nobody has to go into debt for public education. Debt Free Future Act is the solution we need to pass it now. Let's work together and make this reality and change lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. And not only does Isabel have the stories, but she's talked to us about one of the solutions that we're fighting for, really fiercely. I'm going to ask Sasha Link to talk to us from her perspective of an adjunct, because we believe that our students' learning conditions are directly tied to the working conditions of their educators. And Sasha can really speak to the challenges as an adjunct to give what her students actually need and the justice that she needs. Sasha, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. May I first say hello to the Congresswoman?
Please.
It's phenomenal to be on the same in the same space today. I'd like to first start off. There are two quotes that came up today that I think are pertinent to this discussion. One, Max mentioned access to help students succeed. And Merrie mentioned, quote, our working conditions are conditions in which our students learn, unquote. So I am proud first to graduate from high school and then to attend a 4-year college, to then go off and gain my master's degree in creative writing, and to, as of last summer, pass my comprehensive exams toward my doctoral studies. So I'm excited about that. I'm ABD at this point. And as I think about it, when on my journey, I had a host of mentors, a host of advisors, a host of teachers. And as a result, I am honored, honestly honored to teach at Bridgewater State University and Massasoit. I'm honored to give back. I consider it a gift, quite honestly. What I'm not honored by are the conditions in which I have to teach. So I'm technically an adjunct faculty member and I'm not supposed to advise, but of course I advise. I'm not paid for advising. I don't have, as Max mentioned, pay parity. I don't have health insurance. I don't have equitable pay, but yet I take students from classroom to private spaces on campus to make sure that their needs are met, to make sure that they, are on a track to succeed. Most currently, during the COVID pandemic, I started to track how many students after the Zoom sessions would say, Professor, can we meet? Can we talk after class? And so I'm in a predicament where, of course, I'm going to say yes. They'll never know that I'm not paid for this or I'm not supposed to do it. And I just think that we can do better. I want, I need, and I deserve, and students deserve more than me to be taught, to be trained, to be guided, to be mentored in a way that focuses on them. And we're not doing that. And I think that all of what everyone here is doing, I command it, and I ask that we come closer to closing these gaps so that we can, to Max's point, give students access to truly succeed. So that's my take today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. And Janitza is a counselor, so she brings the perspective of what it's like to work in a community college in student support services, both what she hears from her students and her thoughts about the needs of the community college. Welcome, Janitza.
Thank you, Merrie. Hello, Congresswoman. I'm here to talk to you about the community colleges, but first I would like to give you a little bit of my background. I am a proud Puerto Rican who grew up in Roxbury and a first generation college student. And talking about the community colleges and where students work in the front line and are less likely to have resources to take their classes from home. When the pandemic first hit, many of them did not have internet connection or personal laptops. And when the initial CARES Act funding we received, many schools were able to loan student laptops to help navigate in the new world. More than ever in community college, or students need to have access to support services because after the pandemic, the need has become higher. However, since the enrollment have decreased, even during times of increased student need, these jobs become less secure and positions may be caught, leaving students with fewer resources to help them be successful. This is largely due to the dependence of community college on student tuition versus state funding. Community colleges have been historically been underfunded by their states, who give disproportionately higher amount to four-year colleges, even though their students typically have less need. With community college and the students who traditionally enroll at them the most deeply impacted by the recent pandemic, it is more important than ever for the state to commit to funding community colleges based on this student needs. And talking about the risk of losing our jobs, failure to do this put at risk job of part-time student support staff like advisors, mentors, and tutors. Lastly, I want to thank MTA for giving us a space to advocate today, and thank you for Congresswoman for taking the time to be here. It's really a blessing to be in this space with all of you. Thank you.
And look at this screen of 5 powerful ladies. We can do anything, can't we, Representative Pressley? What are your thoughts about what you heard today?
Yeah. Well, again, as I said, the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. I'm so appreciative of your sharing your lived experiences, which has made each of you experts in where we need to go. So I thank you all for being specific, for being prescriptive. Just a couple of questions. I'll try to be brief with them because I want to make sure that I'm hearing from you. So things that are top of mind for me, I was speaking about trauma at the top of my remarks, and it's one of the things that I've been advocating for with the White House, that we have a a recovery that's trauma informed, and that really begin in our learning communities. And so anything that you might offer on that front, because we know that's so critical to the readiness of educators to teach and of students to learn. It's really where everything shows up, right? So I'd be curious as to your thoughts on that. Secondly, when it comes to college readiness and preparedness, as we keep underscoring that it's not just about getting accepted, but about completing your education, what do you see as some of the gaps, and what should I be advocating for when it comes to supporting college readiness? And then finally, what do you think is most important for me to center in my advocacy when I'm fighting for federal dollars to invest in higher education as the public good that it is? What do you think is most important for me to be uplifting and to be centering in my advocacy?
Any one of you can feel free to jump in if you have some thoughts.
Yeah.
Hello, Congresswoman. I think that having more financial aid readiness is important because our high school students are signing loans left and right and not really deeply understanding that you're basically signing your life away if you don't pay those student loans once you finish school. That would not be a good thing if you don't pay them back. And basically understanding the reason, the responsibility behind it. A lot of the times, in my personal experience, I went to a private school and I got into debt and I could not buy a house because of my big student loan debt. Yes, yeah, because I have faith that the student loan bill will pass, but I could not afford buying something in Boston for $50,000, right? We know that the housing market is not there. So I want our future generations to not be able to worry about that and really understand the responsibility that goes behind signing for student loans. Thank you.
Just on that, I appreciate that so much. And certainly my own experience being raised in a single parent household and not having access to many family members who had attended, college. I was, one of the first in my family. I was filling out those forms and applications by myself without little oversight or without very much oversight or guidance at all. And so I know that 85% of Black students feel they have no choice but in Black and Brown to take out loans because I was one of them. Because again, our families don't have generational wealth. I also know that, and it's personal, not abstract to me, that we're 5 times more likely to default on those loans. And I was one of those people as well. And then that affects your credit score, and in turn, every other choice in your life trajectory. So one of the things that I heard from high school guidance counselors is that they were mostly hearing from and really being heavily marketed by for-profit colleges and universities, which is why they were inclined to counsel most of their students to pursue those schools. So your point is very well taken about education around what exactly you're signing up for and what you're signing away.
And related to that, as we've been driving across the state listening to our members, we're hearing that our counselors on the campuses have unbelievable ratios, so they can't give meaningful counseling to our students. And this is another reason why in this year's funding of the Cherish Act, we are calling for money to increase the Success Program, which brings wraparound services in addition to all kinds of other counseling to our campuses for our students. It's just not reasonable to have a caseload of 500 to 1,000 or plus and really be able, students, it's not fair to students and it's not fair to our counselors.
Thank you, Merrie. I was going to ask you, what are those ratios? Because I want to make sure that I'm enumerating those in my conversation.
We can get you more specific campus by campus ratios to the places where we have them. I think that is important to have those statistics.
Sasha, Isabel?
Yes. So Congresswoman, I would love to see, as I'm a teacher in an early access program through the New Heights Charter School to Massasoit. So it's a bridge program. It's 99% ethnic kids, Black and Brown kids. But I've really noticed that it's an advanced opportunity for them to join in on campus. They become a college student in their 11th year, and they have access to all of what Massasoit has. And I've found in many ways, they're just exposed to so much more. I'm not positive how that program's funded, but to see more early access, I know, as a young girl had grown up in Roxbury, if it were not for the Move On Youth Development Program where I had an form of early access, I would have been lost. That's number one. Number two, to your question, I teach to the whole student. I think about their mind, body, soul. They tease me sometimes because I'm always checking in on them. And I like to see maybe healthcare support things that I do, that I recommend them do: acupuncture, massage therapy, holistic practices. I do a lot of low stakes writing with them so that they know that I'm thinking about them academically, but beyond that, it's their mind, body, soul. And that speaks to the trauma work that you're doing. So I don't know, health insurance is tricky, but if we can get some advocacy around supporting them, because the last point, some of them think it's luxurious to get massages, when in reality, it helps so much. But if they don't have access to it, it does feel a little distant, as if they can't, grasp the benefits, etc. So thank you.
So I could just add that I would love for you to come and fight with us at the State House and make us their reps. It corresponds on the Debt Free Future Act, and also to cancel student debt once and for all, because especially our color, we are it's not working for us, and it never worked for us. So can we please change this education system? We need to dismantle the system. And that's what we need in which corner.
Yeah. Thank you, Isabel. So, as we've spoken about, I introduced legislation on the federal level to cancel student debt. I've also been calling on the White House to cancel student debt by executive action, which does not require a legislative process, but they can do with the stroke of a pen. And I've been advocating for that to be at $50,000. I do see it as an economic justice issue, as a racial justice issue, and an issue that is affecting millennial and Gen Z, that is affecting elders. I have constituents in my district that are as old as 76, and they are still paying on student loans. And of course, we know that there are those who have been victims of the predatory practices, marketing and deceptive business practices of some of our for-profit colleges and universities. So this is a nearly $2 trillion crisis. I'm doing my part federally, but I do certainly see my colleagues on the state level as partners in that fight. And I'm happy to join ranks with them. I don't care who does it first. If the federal level takes their cues from the state, or the states take their cues from the federal level, I just know that it needs to happen. And so just know that you can count on me as an ally, both on the state and the federal level on that issue. Okay, so I'll talk to my folks. I don't know who's the lead on that bill, but I will confer with my colleagues on the state level. I'm not sure who introduced it.
Yeah, we will get you all of the information. It's so, we recognize that you work at the highest level possible and you're fighting for the federal funds, but given your power and your influence, it really is critical that you figure out the ways that work for you to really, knock on the doors in the State House and say,
absolutely. Oh, Merrie, I'm not shy. Listen, we
I know you're not.
Many issues on the state level, because anything that isn't, I have to exercise some discretion just based on capacity. Right. But things that are systemic and are of care and concern and consequence to my constituents, whether it's on the city or the state level, I'm going to lean in. So you can count on my vigorous endorsement and support. Just we'll talk about, how I can amplify those advocacy efforts. And thank you, Isabella. You are an excellent not only student and mother, but activist, because you have stayed on message about this bill for our entire time together. You spoke about this bill in your remarks. And then in this part, you're reiterating how important it is that I support that. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, because I'm fighting for all the children. We need to fund our children, So.
Absolutely. Speaking of children, would anyone like to speak to the issue of childcare And, whether or not there's work that needs to be done on that front, both to support educators and our families.
I mean, I have to say something. I think that it should be in all colleges, because there's working parents that go to college and sometimes they don't have daycare, so it's very important to put it in the college, or, like even nowadays, even in high schools,
And it's critical at all levels. The MTA has started in the middle, right? We started by winning the Fund Our Future Student Opportunity Act that serves pre-K through 12, but the bookends are early education and childcare and higher education. And certainly our students who are in college need on-campus childcare. Our working parents, and we all know that the people who were most impacted by this pandemic were women. They had to step out of the workforce. And again, this is another structure of racism. When we disinvest in our communities and public services, women pay the price. Too many women had to step out of the workforce because there wasn't accessible and affordable childcare during the pandemic. So it's critical for our educators to have it. It's critical for our high school students who have children to have it. And it's critical for our college students and just working families. It should be universal, as well as universal health care. And this is a community and labor fight. And that's why we're united. And we're so glad to have you, Rep. Pressley, as an ally, as a partner, as a sister. And I just want to say, the good news in Massachusetts is we have strong legislation and we have strong advocates and organizers, like all of the women on the call tonight. The issue of higher ed has been elevated in the eyes of the State House, which is a good thing. More and more of our state legislators are more finely in tune to the crisis that Isabel and Janitza and Sasha have laid out. We all need to push very hard now so that they put our state money and our federal money where their mouths are. So there's lots of work ahead of us. And we're really pleased to be in partnership with you, Congresswoman Pressley. So I'll give you the last word. Take us out on a hopeful note until we meet again.
Well, just my thanks. Just my immense gratitude again for all of you lending your voices and your expertise to this conversation, and the MTA for your leadership and your partnership. The last year has certainly been an unprecedented one, but we have met these unprecedented challenges with unprecedented organizing, unprecedented community, collective care, mutual aid, and unprecedented hope. And we need to keep that. So just know that you all give me that, and you embolden me in this work. And it is my honor to be your sister in solidarity in the work of education justice. And I've actively listened. You've left a great impression on me, and I will be carrying these stories and your instructions in all of my advocacy going forward.
Thank you. And we will be the wind at your sails as you fight with us and for us. And I'm just going to leave you with Congresswoman's 2 words that she just said: unprecedented hope. Good night, y'all.